I'm Dan Sweet. I'm Director of Public Relations and Communications for HAI. We're glad you joined us today. We do know that your schedule is busy, and we appreciate the fact that you took time out of the schedule to join us today. As we mentioned, we're doing a Fly Neighborly presentation on how to fly neighborly in the Robinson R66. Our speaker today is Juliet Page. She is the chair of the HAI Fly Neighborly Group / Environmental Working Group. She has, since, I guess I got your old slide up there, Juliet, I apologize. I will correct that. She is no longer with the Volpe Center. She's with, I'm sorry, we'll have to ask her what it is.
Blue Ridge Research and Consulting.
Blue Ridge Research and Consultants. Thank you so much. I do apologize for that. I thought I had all the things corrected from the last one. We'll go ahead and these are interactive webinars. We do appreciate your participation with these. Juliet does have at least 2, if not 3, question and answer sessions she's willing to do. To ask a question, please use the question module that's at the bottom of your screen or at the side of your screen, depending on how your screen is set up. We will try to follow the chat feature, and I will put that handout link in the chat feature. But if you have a question, please use the question module. It makes it a little bit easier for us to follow. We will do our best to get to every question today. These webinars are being recorded. We will try to provide the link to you as soon as possible after the recording is done. It may be for Friday afternoon here or possibly Monday morning at the latest. With that, I do appreciate your patience. Let's invite Juliet to go ahead and come on and get started today again. And sorry again, Juliet, about the
no worries. We're good. We're good. People can find me if they need to. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And today we're going to talk about Fly Neighborly with the R66. I am going to share the right screen here, I hope. I think that's the one I want. Turn on the sound. Okay. Are you guys seeing the slides? Okay.
Yes.
All right, good. Thank you. All right. So let's just dive into it. I will turn my video off and we'll get started here. So thank you again. Hello, welcome. Today we're going to talk about noise abatement helicopter approach operations. This module is part 1 of the 2-part training session that provides general information on helicopter approach noise and how approach noise abatement guidance is developed for helicopters. Robinson R66 specific fly neighborly approach noise abatement guidance is provided in part 2 of this training session. We'll be getting to that in a little bit. The training is supported by Helicopter Association International, the Federal Aviation Administration, the U.S. Department of Transportation Volpe Center, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The goal of training is to provide you, an R66 pilot or operator, with the knowledge you need to perform quieter approaches in your operations. The training objectives include providing you with a brief overview of Fly Neighborly, a basic understanding of the key elements of helicopter noise generation, an understanding of what influences the generation of what is known as blade vortex interaction or BVI noise during helicopter approach operations and how you can avoid it. Up-to-date guidance on the recommended approach noise abatement procedures specific to the R66 and general tips and guidance for conducting Fly Neighborly operations. This training module includes several sound recordings, and we're going to be playing them. So hopefully you have your volume all turned up. Okay, so let's get started with a brief overview of the Fly Neighborly training program. It was initiated by HAI in the early 1980s and continues to be supported by numerous private and public partners, including the FAA. The training is intended to be a holistic approach to mitigating helicopter noise impacts on the community and is more than just noise abatement flight procedures. Operational, geographical, meteorological, emotional, and political aspects all factor into the implementation of Fly Neighborly for helicopter operation. More recently, Fly Neighborly has been incorporated into the iFlyQuiet program launched by the FAA, HAI, and the Vertical Flight Society. The iFlyQuiet program includes extensive flight testing by NASA and the FAA to develop Fly Neighborly information and flight procedure guidance. It includes the development of additional promotional and educational materials, tips and tools for operators to use for community outreach. Institute's formal training programs in person at HAI's annual Heli Expo event, and online under the HAI Online Academy and the FAA Wings training program. A key objective of Fly Neighborly and iFlyQuiet is to provide you with tools needed to successfully address your community noise issues. The Fly Neighborly Toolkit includes guidance on noise abatement, flight procedures, route planning, and other operational opportunities for reducing noise impacts. Fly Neighborly and iFlyQuiet programs also provide techniques to help you conduct effective community outreach to foster better relationships between you and the communities in which you operate. A fairly extensive set of resources have been developed for iFlyQuiet and the Fly Neighborly program. We won't go through them now, as they're included in the handout to all the course participants, and that's that link that was shown earlier. We'll show that a few more times. When you get it, please save or print the sheet for future reference. With iFlyQuiet support, the HAI Fly Neighborly program provides general tips and recommendations for quieter helicopter operations, in addition to the model-specific noise abatement guidance. A downloadable flyer is available on the HAI website. This slide is also included in the handout. Several of these general tips are relevant to conducting Fly Neighborly approaches. First, descents at less than 50 knots are not recommended. The long duration of approaches at these airspeeds can be annoying and independent of noise levels. Second, routing changes can be as, in some cases, more effective than flying noise abatement procedures. We'll get to this in further detail later in the course. Third, straight in flight is generally quieter than turning flight during approaches, although turns during approaches may be desirable if the resulting route avoids noise-sensitive areas. Finally, when executing turns during approaches, turning away from the advancing side of the main rotor is typically quieter than turning into it, and level turns are generally quieter than descending turns. The objective of this next section is to provide a basic understanding of helicopter noise, and in particular helicopter approach noise. Key elements include an overview of the primary noise sources emitted by a helicopter in takeoff, cruise, and approach, an understanding of blade vortex interaction noise, also known as BVI noise, which is the dominant helicopter source noise during approaches. Helicopter noise is complex. It's typically rotor noise dominated with multiple source noise mechanisms that emit noise with varying characteristics in different directions from the aircraft. These sources include thickness noise due to air displacement by the rotating rotor blade. It trends with both the rotor speed and blade thickness. It's emitted in the plane of the rotor in the forward flight direction and is typically most important for cruise noise. High-speed impulsive noise, or HSI noise, is a noise associated with the formation of shocks on the main rotor blades near the tips. It's also emitted in the tip path plane and projects forward of the aircraft. HSI noise typically only occurs at high forward speeds and low ambient temperatures for helicopters designed with higher blade tip speeds. Rotor blade loading and non-tonal broadband noise are projected out of the rotor tip path plane of the rotors. They're an unavoidable byproduct of the air loads on the main and tail rotor and rotor blades due to the generation of lift. Blade vortex interaction noise typically only occurs during the descent condition and can be emitted below the rotor tip path plane, both forward and aft of the aircraft. This rotor source noise is generally the primary content of approach noise and will be covered in greater detail in this training module. All of these noise sources are evident for both main rotor and tail rotor, but usually only loading and broadband noise come into play for tail rotors. Tail rotor noise typically is not a big factor for helicopter approach noise. Helicopter approach noise is dominated by BVI. The pop-pop sound of the very intense impulsive BVI noise is also referred to as blade slap. The presence and strength of blade vortex interactions during descent is determined by airspeed and rate of descent, with more intense BVI occurring at specific airspeed and descent rate combinations that unfortunately often coincide with normal approach speeds and descent rates. Conversely, airspeed and descent rate conditions can be identified that emit little or no BVI noise to provide noise abatement. BVI noise is created when a rotor blade passes through or close to the wake structure of a preceding blade. The interaction occurs with the tip vortex shed by that preceding blade, and the intensity of that interaction is determined by the distance and the geometry of that tip vortex relative to the rotor blade. Blade vortex interactions on the retreating side of the main rotor generate BVI noise that's directed downward and rearward of the helicopter. In general, retreating blade BVI noise is not as critical as an advancing blade BVI noise for noise abatement. In the lower right corner, we have a top view visualization of advancing and retreating blade interactions. BVI noise is a very impulsive noise that is typically also very directional from the helicopter, depending on how and when the interactions occur during the main rotor revolution. BVI noise can travel relatively long distances and trigger high annoyance on the ground. BVI directivity can shift with changing descent condition, changing where the peak impacts are on the ground relative to the helicopter's flight path. BVI on the advancing side of the main rotor generates noise that is directed down and forward of the helicopter. Both noise abatement procedures and routing can be effective for reducing approach noise impacts to fly neighborly. Because of the strong relationship with airspeed and descent rate, BVI noise is typically the helicopter source most amenable to reduction or elimination by changing flight condition, and hence has long been a focus for the development and implementation of fly neighborly noise abatement procedures. And it's also the focus of this training module. Okay, the objective of this section is a more detailed understanding of BVI noise emissions during approach and how this understanding is used to define approach noise abatement procedures. Excuse me. Key elements include why BVI noise occurs during some approach conditions, deceleration effects on BVI emissions during approach, and how noise abatement procedures are defined for avoiding BVI noise based on this information. So when does BVI noise occur? If you plot noise as a function of airspeed and rate of descent, there's typically a characteristic region of airspeed and descent rate combinations in which blade vortex interactions occur. Often this region is presented as a fairly compact region of peak BVI noise, surrounded by a significantly larger region identified for avoiding BVI noise. This region of descent conditions with significant BVI noise will be referred to as the BVI avoid region. The resulting graphic is also sometimes referred to as a fried egg plot, for obvious reasons. The location and extent of BVI noise regions on an operational noise plot are helicopter model specific. Some helicopter models can have an extended BVI noise region or have more than one BVI noise region with separate ranges of airspeeds and descent rates where vortex interactions occur with different rotor blades or at different points in the rotor rotation. There will also be differences between BVI noise emissions to the left-hand and the right-hand side of the helicopter, with peak BVI noise typically skewed towards the advancing side of the helicopter. Airspeed and descent rate determine the rotor tip path plane and the trajectory of the wake relative to the rotor, both of which factor into BVI noise generation. To illustrate this, 3 descent conditions will be shown for 80 knots at descent rates of approximately 150, 500, and 800 foot per minute that start above and end below the BVI noise region. Typically, a helicopter incurs little to no BVI in level flight or very shallow descent as the wake remains below the rotor. As the wake trajectory moves up into the rotor at moderate descent rates and certain airspeeds, a helicopter can emit strong and intense BVI noise. Further increasing the descent rate can get the wake trajectory above the rotor, so steeper descents, short of auto rotation, but below the BVI avoid region, can incur little to no BVI noise. A comparable in and out of BVI sequence occurs for 500 foot per minute descents at 100, 800, 180 and 60 knots for this example case. In addition to changing airspeed and descent conditions, deceleration can be an effective tool to reduce or avoid BVI noise. Past testing has shown that a helicopter can quietly transit its high peak BVI region by decelerating through it, as shown by the red arrow. Deceleration significantly increases aircraft pitch attitude as if the helicopter were operating at a higher descent rate or glide slope, as shown by the green arrow. Now we're going to listen to a helicopter approaching both at a constant descent condition in the BVI void region and decelerating through the BVI void region. So this first one will be the high BVI condition. Okay, and now we will listen to the decelerating approach condition. Deceleration can also aerodynamically put a helicopter into its BVI void region. This typically occurs when a helicopter is executing a shallow or low descent rate approach, and for some helicopters, it can actually occur in level flight at lower airspeeds. In this case, the aerodynamically higher descent rate because of the increased aircraft pitch attitude puts the aircraft into the BVI void region. In general, deceleration during shallow, low descent rate approaches should be executed at 1 knot per second or less to avoid putting a helicopter into its BVI void region. If BVI noise is evident, try further reducing the deceleration rate. For some helicopters, however, the BVI void region extends too close to level flight for even a slow deceleration to be effective. Once you're past the noise-sensitive areas of the BVI void region, descend is needed to complete the approach and landing. The position and extent of the BVI void region, operational considerations and constraints, and of course, safety considerations, all factor into the development of approach noise abatement procedures for a specific helicopter. For example, if altitude and conditions permit you to do so, establishing a descent condition below the BVI void region at 600 to 1,000 foot per minute and 80 to 100 knots is likely to be both operationally and acoustically effective. Decelerating past the BVI void region can then be executed at any time to complete the approach and landing procedure. Alternatively, a relatively slow deceleration above the BVI void region to 60 knots before initiating the descent can also be an effective, albeit a longer, noise abatement procedure. Any subsequent deceleration to complete the approach and landing for this procedure would be at airspeeds below the BVI void region. The size and location of high peak BVI region is specific to each helicopter model, determining or limiting the available procedures for approach noise abatement. Several key takeaways you should have for this part of the training are: airspeed, descent rate, and deceleration determine the presence and intensity of BVI noise during helicopter approaches. Every helicopter model has its own characteristic range of airspeed, descent rate, and combinations with significant BVI noise. Deceleration effects can help you avoid or put you into high BVI noise, generally helping at higher descent rates but causing a worsening BVI at lower descent rates. Noise abatement procedures can use low BVI airspeed descent rate combinations plus deceleration to avoid BVI noise during approaches. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. So we will take just a couple of minutes of questions now before we dive into part 2.
Okay, Juliet, we haven't had any questions come in from the audience, but I did have a question myself. I hope you don't mind. A couple questions. You are part of the Fly Neighborly and Environmental Committee. Is that open to anybody that would be interested in trying to work to help the industry on issues like this or other issues?
Yes, absolutely. We do still have some openings available in the working group. On the HII website, there's a section that includes all of the working groups, and they can reach out to us through the Fly Neighborly working group link, and we are happy to have others join us, specifically, those who are pilots that can help us refine the training, that have experience dealing with noise issues. There's a whole host of things that we're working on for helicopters, and we're also looking forward to the new urban air mobility or advanced air mobility region as well. So we're looking for expertise in that area as well.
That's fantastic. I know that the advanced air mobility aircraft are going to be different. It'll be interesting to see how much quieter, or if the noise goes up with the volume of aircraft, the number of aircraft that are potentially going to increase.
Yeah, it's going to be a whole new can of worms.
I'm not a pilot. I'm not a maintenance person. I know just enough to be dangerous. As I understand it, the rotor blades create lift, and based on obviously the shape, the lift, the speed. The wider or the chord of the rotor blade means the blade does not need to turn as fast, if I understand correctly. So a Chinook blade that's around 3 feet wide does not need to turn as fast as something, the rotor blades on a gimbal Cabri G2. How does that affect noise, the chord or the rotor blade speed?
So
I know a little bit about how the blade speed itself works, but when your blade is moving slower, I know I can hear a Chinook from a long way away. And of course, the Huey generation from Vietnam, everybody talked about when you could hear the helicopter coming, you knew you were going to be saved.
Right. So there's a lot of nuances. It's not as simple as chord length or rotor solidity, which is a measure of how much surface area versus open area between the blades. It takes into account the blade diameter and the thickness of the chord, all distributed along them. So it's not as simple as that. The newer helicopters have advanced airfoil shapes. So their lift distribution along the blade and the lift coefficient at different RPMs. I mean, basically the point of it is to hold the helicopter up and move it forward, right? So the weight of the helicopter is a parameter in this as well. So some of the more advanced blades have been tailored so that perhaps the tip vortex is not as strong. If you're at a lower RPM, or the blade distribution has been tailored, perhaps the tip vortex isn't as strong. So if it is encountered by a succeeding blade, you may not have as much BVI noise emission. There's some, advanced things with, different shapes of the tip and droop shapes. A lot of that is to address the strength of the vortex and this interaction between one blade and its vortex and the following blade. So there's a whole lot of noise mechanisms, and I would hesitate to, I can't generalize it, but all of those parameters in terms of chord length, et cetera, do affect the noise generation. Generally, the newer design helicopters are more benign and they're quieter because we've learned a lot over the last 40, 50, 60 years. And so that is probably a more deterministic parameter than just hinging in on one blade feature.
Okay, we did have a question that came in, I guess as a result of what I was asking. It looks like he's probably trying to clarify what I was, he said his blade slapping noise caused along the blade length or just the rotor tip?
It's a combination of both. So remember the little video I showed, like the fifth or sixth slide in? So you have a vortex and it can be oriented in any number of directions. And then you have another blade coming on. And if you're looking at a top view, this blade can intersect it. So the vortex can go from the tip to the root, or it can hit another geometry. So that vortex covers it going from the root to the tip, or they can hit end on, flat on. That's the noisiest one. So it's very geometrically dependent. Depends on what the angle is it the advancing or retreating side? It all depends. But yes, that does affect the intensity of the BVI. It affects the direction of it. Not only is it going forward or aft, but how far in the plane or out of the plane or up or down. It's also it's a geometric thing.
Okay, I appreciate that. That was a question from Roger Cow. I hope I got his name correct. Juliet, let's go ahead and turn on, I'm going to turn my camera back off. I'll let you turn your camera back off, and we will get further into the presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. So let's keep going. Okay, part two. So we completed part one. We're now going to switch from general noise abatement applicable to all helicopters to focus on the R66 helicopter. So key training objectives for this part 2 include understanding the R66 operational noise plot developed to show BVI noise versus approach condition, knowledge of the recommendations for R66 approach noise abatement, knowledge of left, center, right BVI noise characteristics and noise abatement guidance for the R66, understanding how the R66 noise abatement guidance can be used in routing approaches for improved fly neighborly, listening to oral comparisons of noise abatement and high BVI noise approaches. Let's look a little more depth at the R66. This is the operational noise plot on the right. A joint NASA FAA flight test program for the R66 was conducted in 2017. Objectives of this test included noise measurements with a large area microphone array over a broad range of descent conditions. It included initial identification and testing of potential approach noise abatement procedures and maneuver and turns testing. Test outcomes included on-site field observations and ground noise measurements for each approach test point, as well as an evaluation of preliminary noise abatement procedures. A post-test outcome is the operational noise plot specific to the R66 that provides insights into the R66 BVI impacts on the ground during approach operations. This operational noise plot is the latest generation of what was previously called a fried egg plot. Red colored contours on the R66 op noise plot indicate descent conditions with high BVI noise. With the darker the red, the more intense the BVI noise. As a contour changes from red to orange to yellow, BVI noise content decreases until little to no BVI noise is evident. High BVI noise was generated with the gray contour, while peak BVI was found within the white contour. Overall, approach noise findings indicated by the R66 op noise plot include high BVI noise was evident at low airspeeds and moderate descent rates, with peak BVI noise observed near 60 knots at a 4.5-degree glide slope, or 400 to 500 foot per minute. R66 noise generally decreases with increasing airspeed, although some BVI content was observed near the flight track for 3-degree approaches up to 100 knots. For airspeeds above 60 knots, R66 BVI noise generally decreased with increasing rate of descent, particularly at descent rates above 1,000 foot per minute. Descent conditions with significant BVI noise, however, extended well beyond these BVI noise contours. Note that the levels and range of noise depicted as colored contours on the R66 op noise plot are specific to the R66 and are not applicable to other helicopter models. Two key R66 objectives were identifying the BVI avoid region, the descent conditions to stay clear of to avoid high BVI noise, and to find a region of effective noise abatement descent conditions to support and fly neighborly guidance. Field observations, ground noise measurements and contour plots, and the R66 op noise plot were all used on identifying these regions. Overlaying the contour, defining the extent of descent conditions identified as having BVI noise of significance, establishes the BVI avoid region shown on the R66 op noise plot. Similarly, the green contour box identifies the region of descent conditions providing effective approach noise abatement. For the R66, the 2017 test indicates that the most effective noise abatement is achieved with descents at higher than 800 foot per minute and airspeeds higher than 60 knots. In general, noise abatement should be more effective the higher the descent rate is within this region. Selection of a descent condition within this region is at pilot discretion, subject to safety and operational constraints, some of which we'll discuss later. Note that the dashed green lines are soft boundaries. The upper limits to airspeed and rate of descent are set by safety considerations, passenger comfort, and other considerations. For some flight operations, you may need to limit descents to less than 800 foot per minute for approach operations. In this situation, the 2017 R66 test supports an alternate noise abatement procedure with airspeeds greater than 90 knots for descents less than 800 foot per minute. Okay, so let's talk about how to use this. The R66 recommended fly enabling approach procedure. First, transition from cruise to a descent condition in the green box. How this is done is not critical, but maintaining airspeed above 90 knots while transitioning is recommended to avoid BVI noise. Once your descent rate gets above 800 foot per minute, maintain your airspeed and descent rate in the green box as long as it's practical and safe. Then, to complete the landing, decelerate as late and quickly as safe and practical to land the aircraft. An alternate R66 fly enabling approach procedure, transition from cruise to the descent condition in the blue box. Maintain your airspeed and descent rate in the blue box as long as practical and safe. To complete the landing, decelerate at or near constant descent rate and land as quickly and practical and safe to minimize the BVI noise. Manufacturer provided noise abatement guidance aligns well with the current noise abatement recommendations and is also usable if altitude and conditions permit. The R66 Pilot's Operating Handbook notes that BVI noise, quote, generally occurs below 100 knots indicated airspeed, unquote, and quick quote, usually be avoided by maintaining 100 knots until rate of descent is over 1,000 foot per minute, then using a fairly steep approach until airspeed is below 65 knots indicated airspeed, unquote. This guidance does not specify what fairly steep is, but if 1,000 foot per minute is maintained until airspeed reaches 60 to 65 knots, the 2017 NASA FAA flight test supports this procedure for use as noise abatement. If a constant glide slope is used when decelerating to 60 to 65 knots, the pilot's operating handbook procedure may be nearly as effective as the current noise abatement recommendation, but rapid deceleration should be employed during final approach to ensure safe transit of the peak BVI region. Now we're going to listen to several R66 noise recordings that'll let us compare recommended noise abatement conditions with peak BVI, with the peak BVI condition and with each other. Let's listen to these. Oopsie. Okay, so here's the first one, which will be the peak BVI noise condition in the red area. So now we'll listen to the recommended one in the green box. Hopefully you heard that was a lot quieter. And now we'll listen to the alternate procedure in the blue box. Okay. So R66 approach noise abatement increases with both descent rate and airspeed, with the best noise abatement achieved at high descent rates and higher airspeeds that require significant deceleration of the aircraft to complete the landing. The high descent rates and deceleration rates that achieve effective noise abatement, however, bring to bear multiple practicalities and safety considerations for executing these approaches. These considerations arise from both aircraft capabilities and environmental conditions such as wind. First, both pilot workload and passenger comfort can be significant considerations for the high descent deceleration rate approaches recommended for the R66. White knuckle approaches are not the intent of this guidance. You may, for example, have to fight to get the aircraft down when executing a steep descent with a tailwind, particularly if you're initiating the descent from a set waypoint. We know of one airport's helicopter noise abatement procedures where this is sometimes necessary. Getting into auto rotation as a normal operating condition is not the intent of this guidance. Maximum descent rate should be limited so as to avoid going into auto rotation. Maximum deceleration rate is set by aircraft capability, but operational considerations, including passenger comfort, will likely limit practical rates to 2 or 2.5 knots per second. This sets the minimum time requirement needed to decelerate for landing, which in turn sets the minimum starting altitude need to complete deceleration. That's an important consideration for high-speed, high descent rate approaches. For lower cruise altitudes, deceleration will have to be initiated close to or as soon as possible after achieving a noise abatement descent condition. Low cruise altitudes can come into play in limiting available descent rates for noise abatement. For example, if a cruise altitude prior to descent is operationally or weather constrained to say 500 feet, safe and practical descent rates will likely be limited to somewhere in the alternate blue box to have sufficient time to be able to execute a safe deceleration to landing. Reducing airspeed prior to initiating the descent and then further reducing airspeed while decelerating in the green box can help to provide sufficient time for decelerating to complete the landing. In establishing a noise abatement condition at a lower descent rate within the green box, continuing to reduce airspeed may be helpful prior to initiating the deceleration to complete the landing. Deceleration anywhere between the constant descent rate and constant glide slope may be practical in this case, but nearer to constant glide slope may be more desirable for ultimately getting the aircraft rate of descent below 300 foot per minute by 30 knots. If, however, a higher descent rate is established in the green box, reducing airspeed prior to initiating final approach deceleration may be more critical. In this case, decelerating at a closer to a constant glide slope may be desirable or necessary to avoid very steep angle descent as lower airspeeds are reached. For approaches executed from the blue box from lower cruise altitudes, achieving an airspeed nearer to 90 knots will be beneficial for successfully decelerating to complete the landing. Subsequent deceleration to complete the landing should be executed at a constant descent rate until under 60 knots, then continue deceleration at a constant glide slope or descent rate to avoid the BVI region as much as possible. You'll also be looking to avoid a vortex ring state condition. And as noted in Robinson Helicopter Safety Notice SN22, a good rule to follow is to never allow your airspeed to be less than 30 knots until your rate of descent is less than 300 feet per minute. When rapidly decelerating for the high rate of descent approaches recommended for R66 noise abatement, this can potentially mean having to start substantially reducing rate of descent at 40 knots or so to get below 300 foot per minute. Okay, so we'll take just a quick pause here because that was a lot of information thrown out at you and see if there are any questions I and my cadre compatriots on this call can help answer.
We have had a couple of questions come in. One of them was a follow-up question from Roger Cow from the previous session, Juliet. He says, I'm sure temperature has an effect on blade slapping noise. Hotter is likely better. If so, would descending over pavement or roads when available be beneficial?
Yeah, temperature does affect the noise, but it also affects the performance of the vehicle. I'm not aware of any studies that have looked at noise levels over pavement versus grassy fields. So that one, I'm not going to even venture a guess on that one. I'm sorry.
Understood and appreciated. I'm sure Roger does as well. Next question is from John Tukey. And he, I think, has a question that he's saying, is the R66 almost identical to the R44 in its signature?
They are very similar because they have a similar rotor system. So yes, we do have a presentation on the R44 specifically that we gave several months ago. And I believe that recording is online at the HAI at Work webinar. So, but the op noise plots are very similar as you would suppose. Yes.
It is indeed available on our HAI website. Just look for HAI, go to rotor.org/webinars, and you should be able to find the past webinars. And then Gabriel Amato, who's one of our longtime viewers. Regarding EVOT, I've read that the problem will not be the level of noise, but how different audio frequency is. Thus, how we're not used to it. Hence, will we notice it more than the usual aircraft? What are your thoughts on this based on your research?
I'm going to give a really quick answer because we got to get moving. So yes, eVTOL aircraft are going to sound considerably different. And if you look at the plethora of designs out there, there is a ton of variability among them, just in terms of number of rotors and how they're flying and all of that. So this is a whole new area of research. I am not going to attempt to delve into that. The premise of making that a viable business market, I guess you might say, is the levels will be considerably lower so that you can fly more operations without triggering annoyance. And they're targeting acceptability. The jury's still out on what's the appropriate metric, how to spectra, time varying effects get into that. So there's a whole body of research out there. The working group is delving into that, so come join us.
Okay, well, those are all the questions we have right now, so we'll let you get back to your presentation, Juliet.
Okay, thanks. We will move on here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is sort of a practical example. I'll try to take what we've covered so far and put it to use with a particular example. So additional analyses were conducted to evaluate the left, center, right approach noise characteristics of the R66. We defined a three wedge geometry on the ground to evaluate the left side, the center at or near the flight track, and the right side noise characteristics. The wedge geometry is centered on the red arrow, which represents the flight path or the track into the heliport or landing point. At or near flight track wedge will be referred to as the center wedge. The boundaries of the center wedge on the ground are fixed, so what constitutes the lateral extent as well as what is the far left or the far right is dependent on how steep an approach is executed. For moderate approaches around 6 degrees, the lateral extent of the center wedge is approximately plus or minus 45 degrees out or down from the helicopter. So if you look out at a 45-degree angle, that's about the edges of your center wedge if you're at 6-degree condition. Note that the outer boundaries of the side wedges aren't hard boundaries. Although noise further decreases past them, results obtained for the side wedges are going to extend some distance past the side wedges as defined. This slide shows summary plots of the left, center, right data results along with the operational noise plot for the R66. These left, center, right plots are primarily intended to show additional insights into general R66 BVI noise trends with changes in airspeed and rate of descent. Several key takeaways come from comparisons of the left, center, and right R66 noise trends. These are the blue dot plots. First, the highest BVI noise occurs in the center wedge. Significantly lower noise was observed to the left and the right, with the lowest noise found to the left of the R66. BVI noise generally decreases with increasing airspeed. BVI noise also decreases with increasing rate of descent when you're above 60 knots. In general, the faster and steeper an R66 approach, the better the noise abatement. Several key takeaways for the R66 noise abatement come from comparison of the left, center, and right noise data. First, peak noise occurs in the center wedge, so avoid approaches directly over or near noise-sensitive areas when possible. Second, where practical, route your flight operations to keep the noise-sensitive areas to the far left or far right of the R66. What constitute far left and far right is somewhat site-specific. Third, keeping noise-sensitive areas to the far left is the most noise abatement effective option for reducing noise. Finally, although the left and right side noise are relatively low compared to the noise close to the flight track, continuing to utilize R66 noise abatement information procedures should provide some additional benefits when approaches have been routed to avoid flying over or near noise-sensitive areas. Sample R66 noise recordings are again provided for comparison of the left, center, and right noise for the recommended noise abatement approach conditions and with recordings made at a high BVI noise condition. So let's click on some of the symbols and listen to it. So first we're going to start with a high noise condition in the center underneath the aircraft. And that's here. And for that same operational condition, we're going to now listen to what it sounds like on the ground on the left side of the aircraft. Yes, it played the sound. Hopefully you heard it. It was a lot quieter. We're going to listen to the right side now for that same condition. All right. And now we're going to just listen to the center of the recommended noise abatement condition. So this is what it sounds like in the center for recommended noise abatement. And we will now listen to the left side for the recommended noise abatement condition. Right, so hopefully that drives the point home that these noise abatement procedures really work. That is reported data from measured flight tests. Okay, so let's put it together into a real example here. So detailed noise abatement guidance helps for defining approach routes with enhanced flight neighborly outcomes. In this case, the flight operation currently conducts approaches along a flight track that impacts many residential neighborhoods. Executing R66 approaches that utilize the recommended noise abatement descent conditions, for example, maintaining cruise altitude as long as possible, then executing a steep, higher airspeed approach may be effective. Another option is to reroute the aircraft to take further advantage of the topographical features and the R66 left center right approach noise characteristics. An alternative flight path to reduce impacts follows a major commercial road, makes a level turn around ball fields away from the advancing blade side of the rotor that minimizes turn noise, and then executes a steeper descent into the helipad over a non-residential area where BVI's noise impacts should be reduced. This route may be more practical or safe if a gentler turn is executed prior to the ball fields, allowing for a less steep final descent and higher building clearance near the helicopter pad. A second alternative flight path primarily clears the residential areas in level flight or a very shallow descent, makes a level, low bank angle turn, then executes a steeper descent into the helipad over what appears to be a non-residential area. The turn is into the advancing rotor blade and may be around a school for this route. However, that could be an issue. These alternative routes are options to evaluate for modifying the approach route, as several other considerations besides noise abatement effectiveness, including safety, wind constraints, and other factors, must be addressed in establishing a new route for flying neighborly. I want to leave you the several key takeaways from this training module on R66 approach noise abatement. For R66 approach noise abatement, establish a descent condition in the green box on the R66 op noise plot. For steeper noise abatement approaches, decelerate as late and quickly as possible and safe to complete the landing. Also reducing descent rate below 40 knots to avoid vortex ring state below 30 knots. If possible, avoid approaches over noise sensitive areas, keeping noise sensitive areas to the far left or the far right if practical. Keeping noise sensitive areas to the far left is most effective. Keep in mind practical and safety considerations, particularly for executing steeper R66 noise abatement approaches. Safety always comes first. These key takeaways from today's R66 noise abatement training are included in this help sheet provided in the handout to all participants. When you get it, save it, print it, and have it for future reference. Always remember that how, where, and when you fly your helicopter can have a significant benefit for reducing noise complaints and increasing community acceptance of your operations. Aeronautical decision-making and standard operating procedures are also important to achieving consistent and safe application of fly neighborly procedures. SOPs should include noise abatement procedures that reflect local air traffic control, heliport requirements, and incorporate community input. More information on the ADMs and SOPs for noise abatement procedures is provided in the online FAA Wings training for Fly Neighborly, and that's on the FAA Wings site. Community outreach is critical to successfully implementing Fly Neighborly in your operations. Effective outreach can act as a catalyst in further reducing noise complaints. Don't just implement noise abatement procedures. Tell your community that you're doing it and that you're doing it for their benefit and well-being. Finally, developing and implementing Fly Neighborly is not an exact science. If at first you don't succeed, try again. So there's another training program on the HAI website about how to send somebody out into the community where you may be having a noise problem. It's called auditory techniques training for how to listen to your helicopter operations come in and tailor them. So we go have a whole training program on how to do that. So that is everything that we wanted to cover today. So I will go dive back in if there are any more questions at this point.
Okay, we do have one more question from Gabriel Amato. The AC 91-66 regarding surface noise says that when a waterway route is available, it will often absorb the worst noise. For a noise abatement policy suggestion for an island airport, would it be wise to recommend for helicopter noise abatement procedures to keep flight path above the water always when possible, instead of above people and property? And I know Gabriel is in the Caribbean, and so I think that he probably does have a bit more experience in flying around water and people, obviously, with his operation.
Yeah, thank you. From an acoustic perspective, because the center wedge is loudest, if you put that noise over the water, then you will reduce the community impacts. It's much better to have water directly underneath you than people and noise critical receptors. You definitely need to take into account safety and all sorts of other considerations. But if you're looking at it purely from the noise perspective, yes, it's better to fly over the water than fly over the land where there may be people.
And actually, that looks like that's all the questions we have today. Juliet, I think you must have done a really good job of covering everything for us.
Either that or they're all overloaded and drinking from a fire hose. But there is the handout. There is the handout that's available. And this is being recorded so you can watch it and see our mugshots again and again and again if you want. So.
Absolutely. And I know there are apparently some audio issues where I don't know if it's computer, internet, Zoom, just technology in general is fighting us today. Apparently your audio is modulating in and out throughout the webinar. And so hopefully by going back and watching the recording, maybe you can pick up some of the things you might have missed a little later on. We will try to have that recording out to you folks as soon as possible, and we do appreciate your patience with that.
Yeah, I will say that this series of presentations we've had on the new Fly Neighborly with the operational noise, we are developing a set of e-learning webinars that hopefully later this year or very early in next year will be posted on the FAA Wing site. So they're in process, so we will have a much slicker, self-directed e-learning that contains the same content.
Well, that's a good process. And when the question about the R44 came up, I did go back and find the R44 handout that we passed out a few months ago, and I did send the link around to that in the chat. Okay, Juliet, well, thank you so much for your time as always. We appreciate your presentation. We appreciate that you're willing to share your knowledge with us. And of course, we appreciate your participation in the Fly Neighborly Environmental Working Group.
Right, thank you. And it's not just me. There's a whole group of folks at Volpe and Eric Jacobs and the Fly Neighborly Working Group and NASA. I may just be the face of this, but
I was just going to say, I know
group of scientists and researchers developing this. So
I was just going to say, I know we have Eric Jacobs and Amanda Raposa that are working behind the scenes, and we appreciate that they were available to help us out as needed. I know that they were very instrumental in preparing this presentation, so we're grateful for their assistance as well.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And let's see, Juliet, if we can, I'm going to share my screen instead of yours. There we go. Hopefully you'll see this one primary screen. One more chance for the download. For those of you who are watching the recording after the fact, this is not an active link, obviously, through video. Please take a picture with your phone. Please write this down. Do a print screen, do a print or a capture screen, and take your time. I'll hold this up for another second or two while you get this information. That handout has a lot of great information, and we are grateful that Juliet and her team put this together for us. Hey, we've got some great webinars coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have a series on sustainable aviation fuel. I never thought I would get excited about aviation fuel, but this actually has so much potential to do so many positive things for our industry. Especially say you're a tour operator, you can talk to your customers about how sustainable aviation fuel is now the way to go. We know it's not readily available yet, but we want to give everybody a lot of information about this. Next week, September 23rd, is going to be a basic level course. What is sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, and why it matters. There's been a lot of information in the news just lately about this SAF, and we think it's a really exciting new topic that everybody should be working with when this becomes available. We know that there are some of you that have questions, you know, will it work in my aircraft? So the following week, that should say September 30th. Gosh, I just missed a couple different things today. September 30th. Sustainable aviation fuel, the OEM perspectives. We have senior executives from 2 of the airframe manufacturers coming on to talk with us, as well as subject matter experts from their company. We also have one of the senior executives from one of the engine manufacturers coming on to talk with us as well, and one of their subject matter experts. So if you have questions about whether you can use sustainable aviation fuel in your aircraft or through your engine, the answer is we'll let you know. Come on and find out. Right now, we know that it works in every aircraft, that the blends are approved. You should have no problem. It's just a matter of finding it at the moment, for the most part. We will have a questionnaire coming to you shortly. We would appreciate your feedback. As always, I always enjoy looking at the comments and always enjoy looking to see what topics you'd like to see in future webinars. We are building out our schedule for the remainder of the Northern Hemisphere fall and winter, working through the end of the year. How's that? If you have any comments or questions for HAI, we'd love to hear them. We have some exciting new programs coming up really soon. One of them is going to be possibly a game changer for some of the operators in our industry, and we're really looking forward to promoting that. In the meantime, if you do have questions or comments for HAI, please send them to president@rotor.org. Let us know what you think. Our president and CEO, Jim Viola, does see all of them, and he does send them around to our staff for tasking. That does conclude our webinar for today. We do appreciate you took the time to join us. We know your schedule is always busy, and we know that there are other things you could be doing. So thank you, and until next week, fly safe, be safe, and we'll see you very, very soon.